Prowadzę pani. We are meeting today with Mrs. Miroslawa, maiden name Przebindowska, and we had a pleasure to meet the lady that was involved into protection and sheltering of a 13 years old Jewish girl on Sławkowska Street in the city center of Krakow during World War II.
Zaczęła się od ataku Niemiec hitlerowskich na Polskę.
It started with Nazi Germany invading Poland.
W ciągu 6 dni wojska niemieckie znalazły się już w Krakowie.
Within 6 days the German army was in Krakow
Zaczęła się okupacja.
and the occupation started.
Władze okupacyjne od samego początku wprowadziły bardzo
The occupation authorities from the very beginning introduced a very restrictive politics,
I od razu można było zauważyć,
and
że ona
immediately
znacznie bardziej
it
dotkliwa
was
dla Żydów
particularly
mieszkających w Polsce.
horrible for the Jews that lived in Poland.
Ja byłam wtedy uczennicą szkoły podstawowej
I was a student of a primary school then,
i kiedy władze już zgodziły
and
się
when
na
the
rozpoczęcie
authorities
nauki,
agreed to start education,
moje koleżanki Żydówki, które ze mną chodziły
my
do
Jewish
szkoły,
friends that were attending school with me,
do tej samej klasy,
the same class,
już się nie pojawiły, bo Niemcy zabronili.
they didn't show for the classes in September. The Germans banned the Jewish pupils to attend
Na
schools.
żadnym poziomie.
On every possible level they couldn't attend schools.
Obserwowaliśmy cały szereg scen
We saw a whole number of scenes
o traktowaniu Żydów.
which were showing us the maltreatment of Jews.
Mieszkający w elegantszych dzielnicach Krakowa
Those who lived in the nicer parts of the city
byli wyrzucani z
were
mieszkań
thrown
i
away
natychmiastowo
from their
uciekli.
apartments immediately.
Kiedy nadeszła zima, dużymi opadami
When the
śniegu,
winter came with large snowfall,
Żydzi musieli uprzątać
the
śnieg
Jews
z
had to
miasta.
clean the snow from the city streets.
Żywność od początku była racjonowana,
The food was rationed from the very beginning.
wydawana na specjalne kartki.
It was issued with special coupons.
I racje żywnościowe dla ludności polskiej
And the
były wyższe
food
niż
rations for the Polish population was a little bit higher than for the Jews.
te wszystkie restrykcje coraz bardziej się nasilały.
All of those restrictions were intensifying.
W marcu 1941
In March of 1941,
Niemcy już
the Germans
zorganizowali
established a ghetto in Krakow,
i wszyscy
and
mieszkający na
all
terenie
of the
miasta Żydzi
Krakow Jews
musieli się przenieść
had
do
to
Żydów.
move into that district.
Ona się charakteryzowała niskim komfortem.
The district characterized with a very low level of comfort.
W jednym mieszkaniu musiało mieszkać kilka rodzin.
In one apartment there were a couple of families forced to have a life.
A biorąc pod uwagę te niskie przydziały żywności,
And taking into consideration the low food rations, it was very easy to imagine that there was hunger and epidemics.
generalny gubernator
Hans Frank, the general governor,
wydał rozkaz,
issued an order
że
that
Żyd, jakbyś próbował uciec z getta,
if a Jew is running from the ghetto,
będzie ukarany natychmiastową śmiercią.
he will be punished with an immediate death.
Ten stan
And
trwał 2 lata.
condition like this lasted for 2 years.
Również w marcu
Also in March 1943,
Niemcy rozpoczęli przyspieszoną likwidację
the
getta.
Germans started a increased liquidation of the ghetto.
Ludność to było w ramach ostatecznego rozwiązania.
It was happening within the final solution of the Jewish question.
Ludność była wywożona
The
do
population
obozów
was
śmierci.
being taken into the death camps,
I w tym samym roku, 1943,
and within the same year of 1943,
kilka miesięcy później,
few months later,
w moim domu
came an
zjawiła się
auntie to
ciocia
my
z
home
bardzo
with a
szczególną
very
prośbą.
particular favor.
Ciocia prosiła, żeby przez kilkanaście dni przechodzić
The auntie was asking me so that we are sheltering for a couple of days, maybe 12, maybe 13 days, a 13 years old girl, Mirle.
Miri i cała rodzina jej była znana cioci jeszcze sprzed wojny.
Miri and the whole family was known to my auntie from before the war.
Ciocia mi bardzo
My auntie was really desperate to help her because Miri was in a particularly hard situation.
Ona uciekła z getta jeszcze przed jego
She
likwidacją,
ran from the ghetto even before the ghetto was liquidated,
ale nie miała normalnego domu.
but she didn't have a normal house.
Ukrywała się całkiem
She
samotnie
was hiding on her own
poza miastem,
outside the city,
na rozległych polach podkrakowskich.
in the fields which were outside the city.
I spała tam w bardzo prymitywnym, drewnianym
She was sleeping in a very primitive wooden shelter,
a kiedy padały deszcze,
and when the rain was coming,
woda deszczowa wlewała się, ona spała na ziemi, woda deszczowa wlewała się do środka.
the water was entering inside the building and was making everything wet.
Ciocia miała trudności z dostarczaniem jej żywności.
My auntie had problems with bringing her food rations.
A to muszę
And
zaznaczyć,
I have to
że
stress here
sama
that my
nie
auntie
mogła
absolutely did not have
w żaden
conditions to keep this girl at her place.
Mama moja naradziła się z nami, z moją 16-letnią wówczas siostrą
My mother started to talk with us, with my 16 years old sister
i ze mną. Ja miałam 14
and me. I
lat.
was 14 years old.
Uznałyśmy, że kilkanaście dni jej pobytu u nas jest możliwe.
We together agreed that a couple of days of her stay at our place is possible,
I że trzeba pomóc, bo przecież jej grozi śmierć.
and that we have to help because she is under threat of life.
I w ten sposób się znalazła z nami.
And in this way she started to live with us.
Ale
The very
już
first
pierwsze
days of her stay were very problematic because she started to be very seriously sick.
Dostała wysoką temperaturę,
Very
bardzo
high fever,
wysoką, a na jej nogach pojawiły się bolesne dla niej rozległe rany.
and she had a lot of open wounds on her legs.
Sprawa wymagała konsultacji lekarskiej,
We had to consult a doctor.
ale to było niebezpieczne.
It was very dangerous.
Lekarz mógł zarządzić hospitalizację.
The doctor could send her into hospital.
Ona nie miała dokumentów, których szpitale wymagały.
She didn't have a single paper that the hospitals were demanding,
I mieliśmy informację, że Niemcy ustawicznie kontrolują szpitale.
and we knew that the Germans are constantly controlling the hospitals.
Mama moja poszła do zaprzyjaźnionego z naszą rodziną farmaceuty.
My mother went to a pharmacist who was a friend of our family.
Opisała mu tę chorobę,
She described the sickness,
ale mimo tej bliskiej znajomości
but in spite of this acquaintance with this pharmacist and a certain trust that she had for the pharmacist, she actually told the pharmacist that I'm the one who is sick. This lady is the one that is sick.
Pan dał właściwe leki,
The pharmacist gave the drugs, and Miri actually recuperated fast.
ale ciocia, z którą była umowa, że będzie szukała kogoś, kto ją przyjmie do siebie, przyszła z niekorzystnymi dla nas wiadomościami.
But there came my auntie, who was supposed to look for another shelter place for Miri, and she came with rather bad news for us.
Ciocia prosiła, żeby jeszcze jakiś czas ją przetrzymać i została u nas.
My auntie was asking so that Miri is staying with us a little bit longer, and we decided, okay, let her stay.
W tym czasie niemiecki urząd mieszkaniowy, Niemcy wszystko mieli w swojej władzy, przysłał nam nakaz opuszczenia naszego mieszkania.
Exactly at the same time, the German accommodation officers, the Germans had everything under control and at hand, has sent us an order to abandon our apartment, so we had to leave our apartment.
To nie wyglądało tak jak w stosunku do Żydów, którzy musieli się natychmiast wyprowadzać. Myśmy mieli jakiś termin, nie pamiętam dzisiaj jaki, ale ze względu na obecność Miri to było niewyobrażalne, nie do wykonania.
We had a certain deadline, I don't remember how long it was, but pretty much because of Miri in the apartment, it was just an impossibility.
Mama moja poszła do tego urzędu niemieckiego i poszła prosić o zmianę decyzji.
My mom went to this office and started to ask for the change of this decision.
I na to się nie zgodzono, ale postanowiono, mama nalegała i postanowiono, że nasze mieszkanie, które składało się z 2 dużych pokoi, będzie podzielone.
They did not agree to that, but finally the decision was that our apartment, which was made out of 2 rooms, will be divided.
Nam pozostawiono jeden pokój,
We had 1 room to share,
a drugi pokój i kuchnię
and the other room and kitchen
przydzielono polskiej rodzinie.
was given to another Polish family.
Kuchnię dostali ze względu na to, że mieli małe dziecko.
They got a kitchen because they got a small child.
A ojciec rodziny pracował dla Niemców, pracował na kolei.
The father of the family was working at the rail system, so he was working in the German institution.
Pracownicy kolejowi byli potrzebni Niemcom, bo Niemcy prowadzili w tym czasie wojnę na wschodzie Polski.
The rail workers were essential because at that time period the Nazis were conducting the Eastern Front Line against Soviet Union.
Transport materiałów wojennych i wojska odbywał się drogą kolejową.
The transportation of army equipment and army was happening through the rail.
No stąd był ten przydział.
So that's why they were actually settled. This family was settled in Krakow because they were essential for the German economy.
Oni się zaraz prowadzili i od razu zauważyliśmy, że są do nas bardzo wrogo usposobieni.
They moved in and we immediately noticed that they are relatively hostile to us
Bo oni chcieli dostać całe mieszkanie.
because they wanted the whole apartment.
Problemem się okazało także, że ten ojciec rodziny był alkoholikiem.
The problem also was that the father of the family was an alcoholic.
W domu były nieustanne kłótnie,
There were constant arguments in the house.
znaczy w jego rodzinie. Oczywiście oni nie mogli wiedzieć, że z nami jest Miri.
Of course, they couldn't know that there was Miri with us.
Myśmy się ich bali,
We were afraid of them.
a przecież Miri musiała korzystać z łazienki, toalety, przechodzić przez wspólny długi przedpokój.
Miri had to use the bathhouse, the toilet. She had to go through a common vestibule.
Musieliśmy z niezwykłą ostrożnością przeprowadzać ją przez ten przedpokój.
We had to take particular actions in order to make sure that she is secure in all of those common spaces.
No i w naszym pokoju też był problem.
And our room was also a problem. We had only one room to share, and there was still some guests coming, there were still some family members coming, so it was all happening within a small space.
W naszym pokoju myśmy sobie poradzili w ten sposób, że w jednym kącie zastawiliśmy szafy.
In one corner of the room we put the wardrobes.
Tam się tworzyła taka kryjówka dla Miri. Ona tam wchodziła, jak ktoś
It
przyszedł.
was a kind of a small hiding place for Miri, and she was getting there when anybody was coming into the apartment.
Musiała tam cichutko.
She had to wait there very silently, but we were all the time in fear that she may actually start moving, or she may start coughing, or...
Wśród naszych gości był ksiądz katolicki.
Within our guests there was a Catholic priest.
Mama moja do niego zwróciła się z prośbą, żeby wystawić
My mother turned to him so that he is trying to arrange for the birth certificate so that to recognize Miri as a Christian.
Księdzu udało się zdobyć taki dokument.
The priest managed to organize such a document. It was a very precious one because it was actually on the original paper with all the original stamps. It was actually a very good looking document of birth.
Miri sobie sama wybrała.
Miri chose herself that she will be right now Maria Malinowska. A strawberry Mary, a raspberry Mary. This document allowed us to register Miri in the administration of our apartment block. It was also having a particular good outcome that Miri got the food ration card.
Tam w administracji myśmy zgłosili, że ona jest naszą kuzynką.
We registered her as our cousin,
która mieszkała zawsze
who always lived somewhere in the eastern parts of Poland, but when the war came there and the Soviet occupation, she lost her entire family there and she came to live with us in Krakow.
A to jeszcze muszę tak zauważyć, że powiedzieć o tym, że
And additional help was that the lady overseer of our apartment block actually was all the time talking about a great face similarity between Miri and myself, which was a great help.
I teraz już Miri mogła się wszystkim pokazać.
And Miri could actually show.
I ci sąsiedzi ją mogli zobaczyć.
The neighbors could see her.
I osoby do nas przychodzące.
And people coming to us could see her.
Mogła wychodzić na ulicę.
And also she could go to the street. Her comings out to the streets were not safe.
Ona się urodziła w Krakowie.
She was born in Krakow.
Tutaj przed wojną zaczęła już chodzić do szkoły.
She was attending a school just before the war.
No i ktoś mógł ją rozpoznać.
And somebody might have recognized her.
Taka historia się zdarzyła.
Such stories were happening. She came out on her own to the city streets and she met her neighbor.
Ta pani ją oczywiście natychmiast rozpoznała i zatrzymała.
This neighbor of her immediately recognized her and stopped her.
I zaczęła wypytywać, a skąd się tu wzięłaś? I co ty tu robisz? A gdzie są twoi rodzice?
And started to ask all of those questions like, what are you doing here? And where are your parents? Where do you live now? So what was happening to you? So
to był okres, kiedy Żydzi
that was the time when there were no Jews in Krakow at all. The ghetto was already liquidated.
Miri się bardzo zdenerwowała, jak nam później opowiadała.
Miri was very nervous.
Ale ona była bardzo...
She was a very bright, intelligent girl, and she was immediately realizing that she has to do everything in order to save her life. She gave this woman immediately a false address,
I skorzystała z pierwszej okazji, żeby zacząć uciekać.
and she used the first opportunity to start to run.
Taka historia się już więcej nie powtórzyła.
Such story never happened again.
Ale ona nadal wychodziła, ale już stosowaliśmy daleko posunięte ostrożności.
She was still going out to the streets, but we had to be particularly cautious.
Zdarzyła się za to inna historia, która dla mnie
But there was one more story happening, which was definitely one of the most stressful events of my life under the German occupation.
To miało miejsce pod koniec listopada 1944 roku.
It was happening in the end of November 1944. It was an evening, my mother went out, we were only three of us, my sister, me and Miri.
Pamiętam całą scenę. Miri siedziałyśmy
I remember the whole scene. We were sitting on a coach, all three of us, Miri in the middle, reading a book. There was a ring into the apartment, the doors, so our neighbors opened the doors.
I bez zatrzymywania się prosto do
And
naszego
without
pokoju
even stopping for a second, directly into our room there came three German policemen.
Oni byli wszyscy wysokiego wzrostu i
They were all very tall and fully armed.
nasze przerażenie było zupełnie
We were frightened beyond imagination. We were convinced that somebody turned us in, and right now we'll be standing against the wall and being shot.
Zdawaliśmy sobie sprawę, że to jest ostatnia chwila naszego życia.
We realized that this is the very last moment of our lives.
Moja siostra i Miri nie mogły się ruszyć z miejsca.
My sister and Miri froze.
Ja miałam więcej doświadczenia.
I had a little bit more experience because in connection to my work during occupation,
Taką do pewnego stopnia znajomość.
I had a certain knowledge of German, so actually I stood up, I approached them and I asked them, what do you want?
Nie dostałyśmy żadnej odpowiedzi.
There was no answer.
Oni zaczęli się interesować wnętrzem naszego pokoju.
They started to be interested in the interior of our apartment.
Pokój był duży i wysoki, bardzo
The room
wysoki.
was large and high.
Na ścianie wisiało bardzo wiele obrazów.
On the wall there were a lot of pictures because my father was a painter.
Oni zaczęli się tym interesować i krążyli dookoła pokoju.
So they were interested mostly in the walls and the pictures, and they were kind of circling around the room.
To trwało bardzo długo.
It was taking a very long time, and we were all the time absolutely frightened.
Ja byłam już u kresu wytrzymałości i zadałam
I was on the top of my controlling myself, and I asked the question one more time.
I wtedy jeden z nich zatrzymał się przed nami, zaczął się na nas przypatrywać, zaczął się
I remember every second of what was happening there, and after I approached him, I asked him what they want from us. He actually immediately turned into a different person. He had a nice smile and became kind of joyful and started to say, well, you know, you are the three young girls, we are the three young boys, let's have a joyful conversation here.
Oczywiście o żadnej wesołej rozmowie nie mogło być mowy.
Of course, there was no debate about any kind of joyful conversation. From the very first day of war, we were understanding the German Nazis as our
Nie wchodziliśmy w żadne
enemies.
kontakty.
We were not entering into any contacts with the Germans.
Oni zorientowali się, że nie będzie żadnej wesołej rozmowy.
They realized that there will be no joyful conversation here.
I wtedy
And then they said that they actually came in order to check whether the windows in the apartments are darkened because of air raids in the city.
Takie zaciemnienie obowiązywało od początku okupacji, było bardzo przez Niemców przestrzegane i administracyjnie karane.
Such darkening of windows was happening for all 5 years, and it was very strictly controlled and punishable if anything was wrong with it. They were afraid that their light planes might be flying over the city, and they were afraid of the internal light breaking out and kind of releasing the location of the city streets.
U nas to wszystko było w porządku, nie mogli mieć żadnych
Everything was alright with our windows, so they've left the apartment. That was the end of this intense scene.
To był bardzo mocny akcent pobytu Niemców w okupacji.
So it was a very strong last accent of the German presence in our city. Just a couple of months later, in January 1945, after short fighting, the Germans had to abandon the city.
Byliśmy szczęśliwi, że już się to skończyło, że
We were happy that this whole drama finished and our life and the life of Miri was saved.
Ale Miri była smutna. Ona sobie
But Miri
zdała
was
sprawę,
sad
że nie ma
because
domu,
only then she
rodziny,
realized
ona nie
that
wie, co
she has
zrobić,
no
jak
home, no
będzie
family, and she is absolutely uncertain about her future.
w czasie pobytu
When
u
she was
nas,
residing with us, and this lasted over 20 months, she was learning a lot. She was studying a lot.
Bardzo mi pomagała moja mama i siostra.
My sister and my mother were very helpful in helping her to learn.
Teraz, kiedy ona już przestała być Marią Malinowską,
So after the war, when she was no longer Maria Malinowska, she actually registered herself with the local schooling authorities and decided to pass the exams on the entire school material that was obligatory for her up until her age.
w maju 1945 roku
In May of 1945, out of the German imprisonment, there came the father of Miri.
on został powołany do polskiej armii w momencie
He was mobilized into the Polish army when the war started.
Został wzięty do
He was interned into POW, into Oflag, which means the POW camp for officers on the German territory.
Bardzo niedługi czas później, pod koniec maja chyba, wrócił brat Miri, 2 lata od niej starszy.
Very soon after, they came to the city of Krakow the brother of Miri, who was 2 years older.
On miał bardzo tragiczne dzieje.
He had very tragic story.
W momencie likwidacji krakowskiego getta razem z matką
During the Krakow ghetto liquidation, he and his mother were put on the cattle wagon and directed towards the death camp called Bełżec, and he decided to jump out of the rolling train.
Pociąg był konwojowany przez Niemców oczywiście i Niemcy strzelali, ale udało mu się.
The train was escorted by the Germans, and the Germans were shooting, but he managed.
Oczywiście musiał wrócić do Krakowa.
Of course, he had to return to Krakow.
Tutaj go Niemcy ujęli, skierowali do obozu pracy.
He was captured and he was sent into a labor camp.
Z jego opowiadań wiem, że przeszedł kilka kolejnych obozów
Out of his
pracy.
story, we've learned that he went through a couple of different labor camps.
Ale ostatecznie dostał się do obozu.
So finally he was a worker in the Plaszow camp, and he was actually enrolled into the Schindler's List, and together with the group of Schindler's Jews he was saved.
Niestety matka zginęła.
Unfortunately,
Transportem została przewieziona do Bełżca i Bełżec poniosła śmierć.
unfortunately the mother went to a death camp called Bełżec, and she was murdered there.
Ale wróciła jeszcze siostra Miri, bliźniaczka, Szyszana.
They also arrived into the city a twin sister of Miri, Shoshana.
Rodzinie Miri tutaj Szyszanę uratowała, to jest ważne.
Shoshana was saved by the Polish family of farmers in the vicinity of Krakow.
Rodzinie Miri było tutaj
It was very hard for the Miri's family to return into kind of a normal life here after the war.
Oni nie odzyskali ani swojego mieszkania, ani
They
nic.
couldn't get hold of the apartment that they were having before the war, or neither of the objects or things or belongings that they were owning before the war.
Ale w Krakowie działała organizacja żydowska, która niosła pomoc Żydom ocalałym z Holokaustu.
But in Krakow there was a Jewish organization who was trying to extend help to the Jews that were saved from the Holocaust.
Ta organizacja wielokierunkowo
This organization was
działała, ale
working
ona
multidimensionally, but this organization was also facilitating emigration to Israel.
Miri i Szoszana zdecydowały się opuścić Polskę.
Miri and Shoshana decided to leave Poland.
Ten wyjazd nie nastąpił.
This departure into Israel was not happening immediately. They lived for about 2 years in a special preparatory camp in Italy, in which they were mostly learned Hebrew,
A w Izraelu znalazły się
and they only came to Israel after 1948, after the state of Israel was created.
Myśmy wiedziały wszystko, Miri do nas dużo
We
pisała.
were staying in touch with Miri, so we knew every single detail of her life, and we were also in touch with Alexander, who stayed in Krakow. To jest brat, tak? Brat. So the brother Alexander stayed in Krakow.
Aleksander ukończył tutaj wyższe studia.
So Alexander actually married here. He had a son born. He finished school. He was a stomatologist, and only in 1957 they decided to emigrate and make an aliyah to Israel.
Nasza korespondencja, która nadal trwała, została przerwana.
Our correspondence still lasted and we're staying in touch, but only up until 1968, because in 1968, situation in Poland and the anti-Zionist campaign that was happening, the relations in between Poland and Israel were suspended.
Ale wszystko zmieniło się, kiedy w 1989
But everything changed in 1989 when the communism collapsed and solidarity came into power.
I w tym samym roku Miri z rodziną przyjechała odwiedzić Kraków.
And exactly in the same year, Miri with her family came to visit Krakow.
Spotkanie nasze było bardzo przyjemne.
It was a great pleasure to see Miri, and it was a very particular occasion.
I w pierwszych słowach niemal, co mnie bardzo zawsze wzrusza, jak przypomnę sobie.
And in the very first words that they've expressed to us after arriving, they were insisting that we have to visit them in Israel.
Oczywiście z największą radością myśmy przyjęli to zaproszenie i już
Of course, we were very happy to accept this invitation, and only a year later, in May of 1990, the whole Miri's family was helping and guesting us in Israel for 3 weeks.
jednym z ostatnich dni pobytu zostałam poproszona do Yad Vashem.
In the very last day of our stay, we were invited to Yad Vashem, and in a very dramatic and touching ceremony, I collected a medal for my mother, my sister, and myself.
Mogę powiedzieć, że moją bardzo wielką radością jest, że Miri, Shoshana i Aleksander do dzisiaj żyją. Oni są
And
szczęśliwi.
I have to say that one of the greatest pleasures of my life is the fact that Miri, Shoshana, and Alexander are still alive, and they are still alive in Israel. And from the time perspective, I'm very happy that this story happens in my life and that we're given an opportunity to save a life.
Że to jest jakieś bohaterstwo, to było nie tylko konieczność, ale to
We were never thinking about what happened in terms of being anything heroic. It was rather an instinct, an obligation of something had to be done.
Chciałabym Państwu przedstawić dokumenty z tym związane. To jest, ja tu Panu muszę objaśnić, jak Pan to powtórzy. To jest zdjęcie Miri i ja jestem tutaj na tym, na rynku głównym po przyjeździe Miri w 1989 roku.
So that's our first picture on the market square in Krakow. Miri is this little shorter lady in red, and it's Miri and myself in 1989 after we've met for the first
To
time.
jest dokument przyznający medal.
That's the document which is issuing the decoration to us.
Dyplom.
That's the diploma of the righteous among the nations.
I medal. To jest Miri. Miri jest bardzo zainteresowana sztuką i ona rzeźbi. Ale to jest jej hobby.
So Miri's hobby is sculpturing. So she is actually sculpturing. You can see this picture is from last year.
Bardzo dziękuję za wysłuchanie.
Dziękuję pani serce. So thank you very much for listening to the story. And it will be my great pleasure to answer to any questions that you may still have.
I think we'll close it up because we're on a time schedule today. But would you please tell her on behalf of the Holocaust and Youth Rights Education Center?
W imieniu Centrum Holokaustu i Praw Człowieka, ponieważ to pani jest kierownikiem tego centrum.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Dziękuję pani serdecznie za to, że pani się zgodziła przyjąć nasze zaproszenie,